You got a lady?
That's a question. That's a question.
Oh, buddy. I don't know how, and I don't know why, but he can do everything else a spider can.
It's my birthday. Now it's time for me to light my candles.
You're a fraud, Spider-Man!
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the new episode of Heroic Efforts. Thank you for joining us again. We are very grateful for you all coming back. I am one of your hosts, Andy Foreman, and I am sitting here with Mr. Martin Fisher.
Well, hello there.
And I'm also here with Mr. Nick Talamante.
Hey, what's going on, y'all?
And the three of us make up No More Talking Productions, of which this podcast is the first project. So thank you for joining us on this journey. And if you remember from last episode, we were talking about Sony Pictures and their wild ride of producing Spider-Man films. We went over the often overlooked but recently discovered Kino that was Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3. And now we are moving on to what some people might call Kino. Mark Webb's 2014 film / commercial, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So thank you all for joining us again. But first, before we get into this, we're going to have Nick sort of set us up for what kind of a world we were living in where a Spider-Man movie like this was allowed to exist.
Yeah, very apropos, because I thought we were talking about Spider-Man 2, the Raimi one, and I was like, finally, a good movie, happier times, the good old days. But no, in typical fashion, we're talking about this movie, if you want to call it that. But yeah, let's go back in time real quick, because if we're going to talk about this film, I think we need to really set ourselves in the era that it was made. So let's go back 10 years ago to 2014. And I didn't realize this until we were preparing for the episode, but 2014 was a wild ass year. Just to kind of briefly go through it globally, we had the Ebola outbreak and the rise of ISIS. Domestically here in the States, we had the murder of Michael Brown and Eric Gardner, kicking off the first Black Lives Matter protest around the country, and the tragic suicide of Robin Williams. And to top it all off, the U.S. and North Korea almost went to war over the Seth Rogen and James Franco comedy, The Interview, leading to the 2014 Sony Pictures hack. So 2014, safe to say, was a wild-ass year. And the fact that there was a non-zero chance that World War III could have popped off with Pharrell Williams' Happy being the soundtrack is just kind of the cherry on top of it. But, on that note of the 2014 Sony Pictures hack and Pharrell Williams, let's get into today's topic, which is The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yes, and I think in order to give some more context for this movie, we should just dial it back just 2 more years to when The Amazing Spider-Man 1 dropped. That was a pretty interesting summer, because the biggest comic book movies of that year were The Avengers, The Dark Knight Rises, and now the Amazing Spider-Man reboot. And as we talked about in the last episode, Spider-Man 4 was in development for quite a while before Raimi left, meaning everybody else left. And Sony was like, all right, let's just reboot. And so then they got Mark Webb to go on it. They got him to develop it. They got Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, and they sort of took a more gritty approach to it. And they tried to take him back to high school, and they introduced Gwen Stacy, and they tried to introduce a plot with his parents as sort of some sort of overarching mystery for the series. And that sort of led to mixed reviews, despite the fact that Amazing Spider-Man 1 was generally very well received, not only critically, but commercially as well. I mean, the movie made like $758 million. That's pretty damn good. And people generally liked it. People were pretty on board with Andrew Garfield's portrayal. But I think a big criticism was that it was doing the exact same thing that Raimi's first movie did, only 10 years later. So people were thinking it was a little too soon to reboot. And then they were also kind of criticizing the dark and gritty tone, which at that point, rebooting things as dark and gritty had already become kind of a overused trend. But it is obvious when you watch The Amazing Spider-Man 1 that despite the fact that it's a cohesive movie, it's very clearly, the movie that Mark Webb set out to make, it is kind of Batman Begins with Spider-Man. So, there is that sort of already handicapping it. And then you have the Avengers become the most popular thing the same year. So now Sony is like, well, we got to have a cinematic universe out of this. So instead of just making The Amazing Spider-Man 2, they decide to make The Amazing Spider-Man 2 / prequel to the rest of their Sony Spider-Man universe. And the results were, let's just say, mixed. But that's the world that we're living in.
Yes, The Amazing Spider-Man 1, I just want to tap on that real quick. It is definitely a film that I think nowadays has it doesn't have the same rapport that Spider-Man 3 has gained over time. It is a relatively newer film compared to that, but it still kind of falls in that thing of like, I don't think people have really gone back as much as they have on Spider-Man 3 yet. It is definitely a more mixed film, I think, for sure. I don't think it's nearly as good as Spider-Man 3 or 1 or 2 are. But I do think it's at least worth it simply because it has such a powerful relationship chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone. That was something that was kind of the through line for this franchise going forward, and it goes all over the place in Amazing Spider-Man 2. And, it's like 2012 was an interesting time because it's like, yeah, you had Avengers, Dark Knight Rises, Amazing Spider-Man, Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance came out like a few months before that, but, I don't know if we count that. Yeah. 2012 was popping. We had 4 superhero movies in 1 year. That was like the big stuff back in the day.
We had Dredd.
Oh, Dredd
We had Dredd, too. Yeah.
Hey, 5 comic book movies in 1 year? How lucky are we? Skip forward a few years, and it's like, oh, we got 10 of these in 1 year, and we're all exhausted, so...
And you know what? All 5 of those comic book movies from 2012 are better than anything that was released, like, last year, not counting, like, Guardians of the Galaxy 3.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah.
So going from Amazing Spider-Man 1, there were some things that I think are interesting to note on the production side of things. There is a pretty consistent criticism at the time, and Andy touched on it, where it was felt that it was too soon to reboot. It had just been 5 years since Spider-Man 3 had come out, and that's just, it's based on how you feel about it. I'm used to comic books rebooting all the damn time. I mean, it's like you go like, remember like DC's New 52 was the new reboot of the time. And then like 5 years later they go, okay, we're rebooting again, but this time we're bringing all the old stuff back in too to mix with the new stuff. And it just keeps going on and on because that's the nature of comics. But it is very funny to me to look back on that and be like, oh yeah, 5 years to reboot is actually a lot of time, considering nowadays it's like you can go 2 years and all of a sudden you're on a new Spider-Man or a new Batman, or you have 2 or 3 Batman existing at the same time in 3 different movies or whatever. It's very interesting to think back of that era where like 5 years is considered too soon to reboot with this genre. But there are some interesting notes on the production side of that movie where it was like, I do think at the end of the day it is the film Mark Webb intended to make, but there are some caveats that come with that. There was, and this is an issue we're going to see in Amazing Spider-Man 2 as well, is like there are at least 20 minutes of the movie that are just on the cutting room floor, and a majority of that is development for Kirk Connors, who, like, if you didn't know, had a family in that movie. You never see them, but they exist. They were filmed, but they were cut out of the movie. At some point, the Oscorp executive character in that film gets killed by the lizard, and you feel like that's supposed to happen, but they cut that out of the movie, so you wouldn't even know it. He just gets away at some point. You never see him again. Also something that's repeated in Amazing Spider-Man 2. So there's a lot of interesting things that happen with the production side of this movie, and that kind of led into an even greater scale with The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and how many changes were happening in the middle of production, how many cuts were made, how much retooling was going on. And yeah, a big part of that was because they were trying to cash in on the cinematic universe trend. So we're going to jump forward into 2014. It's May. It's hot as hell. I just graduated high school, and this was the hot shit movie, basically, was Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Hot shit indeed.
Hot shit indeed. So when this film came out, it's essentially you've got Spider-Man, Godzilla, X-Men all in 1 month. It was a hell of a summer for me, man. You had just had Captain America the Winter Soldier. The MCU is going strong at this point, carrying the torch for the genre, basically. We had just had a Superman reboot a year before that had mixed results for a lot of people. So we're going to 2014. Amazing Spider-Man 2 comes along, and interestingly enough, had a pretty mixed, I would say, critical reception. And looking back, it's like, I don't know if it was, I don't know if the reception leaned a little bit hyperbolically, like calling it Batman and Robin bad. I wouldn't go that far. But it was certainly mixed. The film ended up only making about $709 million, which it's funny to think about, like, only $709 million when we just had an Aquaman movie just barely scrape past 400, and that's considered a success now because the genre is in the trash basically at this point. But it's funny to think about that. So $709 million, $250 million budget. They put way too high of an expectation on this film to make $1 billion, to start a cinematic universe. I remember the week the movie came out, they were like, we're not just doing Amazing Spider-Man 3, we also have Amazing Spider-Man 4 already dated on the calendar, and also the Sinister Six. This is definitely going to happen. You know, it was this, they were going all hog in just to get people more interested in seeing Amazing Spider-Man 2. Didn't really pay off, and at the end of the day, we were left with what some would call a commercial, I call a film. A cinema experience, if you will. But it is a commercial for his universe you will never see. And I guess we should just get into the discussion on the film itself then.
Yeah, I think I think we're properly teed up to talk about this movie. I don't quite know where to start because it is a huge web of plot lines that don't really all make a lot of sense. They all kind of... Okay, let's just start at the beginning. Okay, let's just start right at the beginning. So the opening of this film is some James Bondian tragedy of super spies like being blown out of the sky and dying in a plane crash. And here's the thing is, I think the problem with this opening, besides the fact that I don't care, is that the rest of the audience didn't care because nobody was connected to Richard Parker from the first one. No disrespect to the actor who played him, whose name escapes me at the moment, but it's sort of like all of the elements that like they were banking on being the backbone of this franchise, as far as like what was his parents doing and what do they have to do, what's the mystery of the Spider and Oscorp and all this stuff, is the stuff people were least interested in. Nobody remembered like those scenes with him as a kid, like, and his super spy parents. Nobody remembered that. All they remembered was like him and Emma Stone. Because that's like the best part of that movie. So you open with a bunch of characters we forgot existed doing something we don't care about because it's a mystery that's not going to be revealed, and it's not going to be revealed well. I'm sorry, Martin. I know you're. I know you feel differently about this movie.
I'm gripping my table right now.
Yeah, exactly. Like I can see, like I can just see you're ready to like jump through the computer and strangle me. I'm just trying to say, as an audience member in 2014. A comic literate audience member in 2014 who loved Spider-Man, who loved all this stuff. I was sitting there in the theater like, oh no, like this is gonna be the plot of this movie. And then, you sort of get into a very, very fun opening scene with Spider-Man stopping a truck. But to me, and I'm gonna let Martin take over after this, but these opening two scenes, both of these, there's just something off about both of them. Every time I watch it, I'm just like, oh man, it just doesn't connect. But Martin, maybe you'd like to give us a different perspective.
Are we going to have the one person it connected with where I was like, bravo, bravo? I absolutely agree with you 100% on the fact that the tone in this film is entirely inconsistent. It does not know what it is going for at all. It springboards between being really dark, really light, kiddish, almost Batman and Robin levels of kiddish sometimes, to like uber serious, like, body horror almost at the end. It's all over the place, really. And yeah, the juxtaposition of these two scenes is a great example of that, where you got like the super spy thing, which nobody cares about. And I'm going to be honest with you, like, I thought it was fine, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know why they focused on it so much, because even considering like comic literate people like Andy and myself, like, can tell you like the super spy Peter Parker's parents shit in the comics is god awful, and was like,
yes.
it's such a bad arc from like the 90s that nobody gave a shit about and nobody remembers because nobody liked it. It's like, I don't care about that stuff, you know. He's got Uncle Ben and Aunt May. That's all I care about. I don't care what his family's doing, you know. There's a reason in Spider-Man 1 with Tobey Maguire, they're just like, oh, I live with my aunt and uncle, and that's it. That's all they ever touch on the family stuff, because who gives a shit about what Richard Parker is up to with his wife? Nobody gives a shit. So I do think the scene itself, I think, is, I'm going to say, well directed for an action sequence set on a really small plane. It ain't no X-Men Days of Future Past plane sequence, but it's pretty good. It's got a dynamic energy to it. Leading into the big scene with Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man swinging in, and it's funny you say James Bondian tragedy, because it's like, this movie has like 3 different points where it actually starts, and the first one is with the plane sequence, and then right after that you're thrown into another opening action sequence, like you're just jumping into the middle of the start of a James Bond movie, and you get your first like big action sequence to start you off. You get 2 at this one, and this one's like, you know, Peter stopping whatever stupid heist is going on, and then you've got Paul Giamatti just acting his heart out in the worst possible direction you could go. And just, okay, listen, Rhino is a stupid character, so I don't have that much connection to like him being stupid in this movie, but damn, they really were just like, do whatever you want, Paul. We're just gonna film you doing it.
They made it even stupider with his big ass like suit, just even dumber.
Well, that'll be the end. We'll get there. But it's like, you know, here is just him with like a tattoo around his bald head, and he's just like, yeah, Alexei Savage, and you're just like, what is going on?
With an incredible accent too.
Yeah, an incredible, genuinely authentic Russian accent. So that kind of sets the stage. You've got like the graduation stuff going on, because, you know, the focus was supposed to be Peter in high school, and they're just like, let's get him the fuck out of here. We got to go to college now. We got to get some drama, some tension going. Let's get him out of here. And so you get like the juxtaposition of the action sequence, and then like the graduation, and then you get Gwen Stacy's speech, which pretty good speech. Don't know why you would ever do that at a high school ceremony, talking about like, oh, death and all that, and like, oh, you got to live and all that stuff. It's so bizarre. And this movie is entirely bizarre, and I love it so much. I'm just gonna say that outright. I love this movie. I love this movie.
That's fair.
I love this movie so much, and it is just a frantic, doesn't know what it's trying to be kind of movie, and I love it. But so you've got this whole setup with this whole ricochet starting you off where you're just banging in all the walls, and then the basic plot outline is like Peter's old friend comes back to town, and his father's passing away because of a disease. It's something that starts to take over Harry's life. He's trying to get rid of it, that kind of thing. And then a million other plot threads are going on where it's like, oh, and then also there's this guy named Max, who's like kind of an obsessive, like kind of nerdy Riddler-ish wannabe character who gets obsessed with Spider-Man, who feels like he's not seen and he's a nobody. And he eventually gets superpowers because Oscorp is basically the Tower of Babel of this franchise, where just all the bad people come from this specific company. And while that's all happening, you have this weird, like, corporate espionage deal with, like, an Oscorp executive named Mencken, who is trying to take over power from Harry, who inherited the company. And then also over here, you've got Peter and Gwen Stacy's relationship stuff going on, where they break up, and they're like, oh, maybe they'll get back together, maybe they won't. I'm naming, like, 5 different plot threads going on simultaneously in this damn movie in, like, the first, like, 30 minutes. It's a lot.
And here we were to think that Spider-Man 3 was a mess. How foolish. How foolish of me.
How foolish we all were. Yeah, there's a lot to this freaking movie. A lot of it honestly could have been cut out and probably should have been. The parent subplot nobody cares about. The weird, bizarre, like, Peter being like the chosen one, essentially, because it's like because he specifically was bitten by that spider, it would only work with him because that's his dad's DNA or whatever in the spider. Some stupid shit, basically, along those lines. And it's like, who gives a shit? Cut this all out. I don't care. Let's just get to Spider-Man fighting Electro and Green Goblin. I don't care about this stuff at all. We are wasting time here doing this. It's just these plot threads that like feel inconsequential to the actual heart of the movie.
It's worth noting that Spider-Man in the comics too always suffers and is not as good when writers try to add complications to his basic character,
Yes.
like who he is and the basic structure of his character.
Yes.
Anytime they want to expand him out beyond a pretty smart high school nerd that suddenly has these amazing powers, it's unnecessary, and to me, again, not to try and sound too pretentious, but it really handicaps like the literally me fantasy that Spider-Man is supposed to be.
Right.
Because it's the same shit as the Star Wars prequels, where everybody hates midichlorians because the whole thing is it's like, oh well, I guess not anybody can be a Jedi. You have to be super special, and you have to be from this super special lineage and all that kind of, and it just sort of undercuts the message of the original trilogy. It's the same thing with Spider-Man, where it's like, well, he's the chosen one, and his dad was a super spy, and he was experimented on, and blah, 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 and that's why he's Spider-Man, because blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, Spider-Man is Spider-Man because Peter Parker is a good kid that, is a nerdy kid who has to struggle with life, and because he has these this aunt and uncle who have guided him, he is the one who can do amazing things with these powers.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That is it. No super spy shit. No nothing. And anytime they try to add to it, it just complicates it, and it takes away from... That's the thing is, and I'm going to let you take back over, Martin, because I know I know you're the man to talk about this movie, but like the thing about it is, and you're going to hear me talk about it a lot on this podcast, is when people forget that superheroes are fantasies, and that the whole point of why we love them and the whole reason the most successful ones endure is because they are power fantasies. And I say that in a complimentary way, and I'm not putting it down because of that. They are power fantasies for people to live out these sort of, grand scale action things that we all imagine in our heads. Like everyone likes to think that they could lift a car off of somebody. If everybody likes to think that they can be the hero of the moment. That's what superheroes are. They're fantasies. They are so far out of the realm of possibility that you don't feel guilty for thinking that you could do it. You know what I mean? Once you start trying to complicate that, superheroes are best when they're simple. When the metaphor that they are is simple. But when the Hulk is a raging monster, it's perfect. When Spider-Man is a kid with powers, perfect. So on and so forth. And the more you try to complicate it with useless backstory, the more you take away from why people even like this stuff in the first place.
Sure.
That's all I have to say about their complication of the plot. Martin, the floor is yours.
Oh boy. Okay. So I agree with you on the overcomplication aspect, because that is an issue with this movie. That's an issue with Spider-Man in general a lot in later comic runs for the character. It is that thing of like, yeah, you shouldn't overcomplicate his actual origin. It's so funny because like you look at Spider-Man 3, and my main critique on like an aspect of that film is like, I feel like making Sandman Uncle Ben's killer after the fact is so lazy and just feels like an attempt to like, gain more emotional points in that film to keep the ball rolling, essentially, and to explain Peter's whole arc with him going bad. And it feels so unnecessary. And then this one ramps it up even more, where it's like, yeah, we've got all these other subplots going on, all this other setup happening, and it feels completely unnecessary. At most, like, Amazing Spider-Man 1, I will give it this. It does overcomplicate certain aspects, for sure. But one thing I do think was it's a smart thing to do in the aspect and the perspective that Oscorp is supposed to be the main hub of the villains in this universe. So I appreciated the idea of like, oh, well, the reason he gets bit by a spider is because they were experimenting on them in Oscorp. And I'm like, well, that's something from... That's fine. That's just a little additional layer. It doesn't really overcomplicate. It is literally in Ultimate Spider-Man from that comic run. I'm cool with that. Mm-hmm. But when you start throwing in the whole like, oh, it had to be like this specific set of spiders who were injected with like Parker's blood or whatever, and he had to be the one to get bitten to get those powers. It's the whole chosen one narrative that nobody really likes anymore, and especially in the 2010s was really starting to fall out of favor post like Harry Potter and all that. So but overcomplication is a big issue in this film for sure. I completely agree with all of that. Now, a part to cover even an aspect of this film, not just in like how many plots are going on, we should probably talk about the villains a little bit. And it is that thing of like, do any of these characters who are the villains get any kind of arc? And I know we're gonna have a huge disagreement on this. Rhino, of course, is not even a character in the movie. He is just there to be a set piece, essentially, twice in the film. So I don't even think we should consider him an arc or a character even at that point. But I will say, I do think Electro and Green Goblin have an arc, and I know you might not agree with me on that, and that's fine. But I am going to go with the perspective of when they were making this film, Elektra was not even supposed to be in the damn movie. It was going to be all Harry becoming Green Goblin in the third act, and that was going to be the original setup. So you kind of, it's so bizarre looking at it now, because like, I mean, Elektra is all over this damn movie with the marketing and everything they put into it. He was the focus, but it was simply because Mark Waid wanted to have Green Goblin. He wanted Harry's like downfall to be the focus and lead that into the third act climax where they're like fighting and all that. That was supposed to be the original film. Sony and Avi Arad very likely told him, you can't not have a supervillain in the first 2 acts of the film. You have to put somebody else in there. So then they throw in Electro because they haven't used that character yet. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think.
First of all, all right, let's just jump into it then.
Yeah.
Marty, maybe you can enlighten me as Sony's, strongest soldier,
Right.
as the man on the front lines, Jesus-ly defending this movie. What the hell were they thinking and were even attempting to do with Jamie Foxx's Electro in this? Because my man not only was looking absolutely wild as Max in this, had these crazy teeth, the bald with the wildest comb over I've ever seen, and then turning into like a very silly like blue guy. Like what the hell was going on with that? Maybe you can enlighten me. What were they even trying to do with him?
Whoa, well, look who's here. Spidey. How was your morning?
Aces, Max. Aces. I've been out saving the world and protecting everybody. But is someone celebrating a birthday today?
I'm not sure. No. Okay. So a lot of that honestly feels like Jamie Foxx being like, "Hey, I got this idea for Electro. Since I've been casted as this character. Can I try doing this?" And they're like, "Sure, fuck it. Everybody else is already cranking the ham up to 11. We'll let you do that." And they went with the whole design aspect. The blue Electro thing, I actually kind of like in this movie simply because, like, I was raised on the Ultimate Spider-Man video game, and he turns into the blue form in that game. So, and fights him in Times Square. So I'm like, I'm totally cool with whatever that was. I'm down with that design. Absolutely. But his whole arc is very strange because it's interesting because it's like he borrows a lot from like Riddler and Batman Forever and Guy Pearce's character in Iron Man 3, where he is kind of like that obsessive, almost fanboyish kind of character where it's like he kind of longs for what this character has. Now, I think his overall story is interesting. I do think his character is fascinating in the sense that he is someone who feels not seen by anybody else. And then finally, when he gets his superpowers, one of the first things he says when he's in Times Square is, "You see me now," because the world is now watching him. And he feels like, it's something that's so important to his character, I think, in that moment. And I think it's actually pretty well handled in that moment. And but unfortunately, I don't know what the performance was supposed to be. I don't know what was going on, why they decided like the comb over thing was the way to go, why they were like, let's give him an ugly set of teeth and then have a little visual gag of his teeth clacking together because of the electricity. I'm like, okay, sure, fine, that's whatever. I mean, I'll give it this. I mean, like, Electro's not really a character that you have much to work with off of the comics because he is just like another, like, just basic criminal character, really, to work with. So I kind of understand where they were going, like, trying to add something. Now, having said that, I don't know why they did it this way.
That's a good point. There's very few Spider-Man villains in the comics that have any sort of inherent emotional origin or emotional arc to them. A lot of them are, like, thugs that fell in a vat of acid. Well, no, that's the Joker. I'm sorry, but like fell in a tank of pickles. You know what I mean? Or thugs that just sort of like, oh, they got hit with a bomb while they were in a sand pit. Or it's the villains of Spider-Man that have any sort of emotion at all in the comics are basically like Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus. Yeah. And I guess the Lizard kind of.
I was going to say, I would throw in Lizard, but they already did that, Yeah.
Yeah, well, and again, going back to The Amazing Spider-Man 1, we're talking about like Jamie Foxx's performance in this film. The Amazing Spider-Man 1, as I mentioned, is like this sort of Batman Begins-ish, like really dark and like it's supposed to be like if Spider-Man was real, like the eyes in his costume would come from sunglasses, like because like all that kind of stuff. And then in this one, like you have like Jim Carrey's Riddler, And it's like, what are you trying to do with this?
I just
and
remember,
remind me,
like,
yeah.
the moment that that guy from The Office is in the film, and he just like makes some crack about Spider-Man, and he just Max Dillon goes into like his head, and he's just like, "You don't know Spider-Man? I know him. He's a Sagittarius. You're a Leo," or something like that. And you're just like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah.
You don't know Spider-Man. He's a Leo. You're a Sagittarius. You will smash him again. I'm gonna rip your well-groomed head off.
That's as soon as that scene happens, you should probably be aware of what kind of movie you're in for at that point.
Can you imagine, this is just a little aside, but can you imagine, this is 2014, no one knows what Batman v Superman is going to be.
Right.
No one, like, that is ramping up to be like the biggest movie of all time. Could you imagine going back to us sitting in the theater watching that Jamie Foxx Electro scene and going like, hey, by the way, in Batman v Superman, Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor is going to make this seem subtle. Like,
Oh my God.
True enough. Now,
that's just an observation I have.
Fair enough. No, I do want to say I'm making my case here as, Sony's strongest soldier in this case. To add more to Elektra's character arc, again, the whole "you see me" thing. I do love the aspect later in the film where Harry's like, "I need you, Max. I need your help." Basically, and goes like, "You need me," and he just like clicks because he's just like, "Oh, I'm the hero now." Basically, like I finally gotten what I want, and now someone knows I exist, and now I can do something about this.
Yes. I need you. I need you, please. 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 I know what it's like to be thrown away. Please, Max. I need you.
I think that's interesting. It's not explored nearly as much as it should be if you're going to go with a character like that, but it is kind of sprinkled in there a little bit, and I do appreciate giving some sort of extra layer on a character that I find very basic. So I liked Electro. I liked his design. I don't know what Jamie Foxx's performance was, but I think it was overall pretty well done, and for a cartoon character, he works. Because this movie is pretty much a cartoon. That's how I view it, basically. This is a cartoon in live action in many ways. So I like Electro. I like what they do with him. I think there is some kind of arc there. It's just not well-rounded as it should be.
I think that's fair. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nick, because I have a little bit of a spiel, so...
I was just gonna say briefly. I mean, I don't agree with you that I think it's acceptable, but I can at least see where you're coming from with it, especially when it comes to Spider-Man villains. Like Andy said, there's only like 3 of them that are actual characters. The rest of them are like honestly kind of like jokes. Like they're just C tier. Like Spider-Man has honestly kind of had a little bit of dog shit characters when it comes to like his villain roster. He has good ones. He has good ones for sure. But a lot of them, I think, when you can boil down to like, it's a thug that fell into like a vat of eels. You know what I mean? That's the kind of caliber you're working with. So I think in that regard, sure, they're not working with a full deck to begin with.
And that's something these films have to work at, I think, a lot, is that they try to apply something else to these characters. I mean, Vulture, at the end of the day, is just a guy that has a bird suit. How do you add more to that? Okay, now he's got a family, and that's the reason he does what he does. That's already way more than the books ever fucking gave that character. So,
I have to go to bat for Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery just a little bit, because I think Spider-Man has Batman, Spider-Man, and the Flash are the 3 superheroes with the best Rogues Galleries in comics. Sure. And then there's a debate, over who could be number 4. I would argue Superman, but that's beside the point. Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery is awesome. It's just, again, getting back to, I think a lot of people that talk about Spider-Man probably, and I'm not trying to sound like pretentious, but probably aren't familiar with a lot of the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko stuff, which is incredibly simple storytelling. It's very, 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 I'm not going to say surface level, because those comics are way more mature than anything DC was putting out in the 60s.
Yes, absolutely.
But they're very simple morality tales. So what you have are basically really cool visuals that Spider-Man fights. Because the Scorpion is cool. Electro is cool. I always thought the Vulture was cool. Now, do any of these guys have any sort of characterization besides I want to rob a bank? No. Right. So I agree that his Rogues Gallery doesn't have much inherent humanity in it, but as far as like cool ass shit you can do with his rogues gallery, you could make like an 8-film Spider-Man series and not run out of new villains.
Well, I think that's kind of Nick's point. I think more so is that like
Mhm.
and I do think like yeah, Spider-Man has I agree with you, Andy, in the sense that Spider-Man has a great rogues gallery, but it comes to the perspective of a lot of them are great just from a visual actions focused standpoint. A lot of them are not good characters, or there's not really a lot to them. So when you have them
Exactly.
when you have them in the films, you do have to add an extra layer just to give them something, because it's like, you know, unless they're going to be a henchman character like Shocker is in like Spider-Man Homecoming, you have to give them something, or you're just going to be, it's just going to be basic criminal guy who has superpowers, and that's it. And that's not, I think, what they're trying to go for usually when they're making a Spider-Man movie. They want these guys to be grand and big, and hopefully their performance can match that, or they go totally ham like Jamie Foxx does.
Just gonna say that's exactly my point. Where I think I agree with you, Andy. It's badass. I love like seeing Spider-Man fight these fools, but if they're gonna be like the central focus of like a actual film, then I think some kind of development is needed. So I mean, that's kind of to Marty's point. Like they're swinging for the fences. I don't know if they hit a home run or if they hit anything, but they definitely swung. So I guess if nothing else, got to give them that.
This movie is like 20 different swings, and for me, a lot of them hit and a lot of them miss for most people, and that's fine. So I guess we should probably move on from Electro. We will maybe dabble with him a little bit more as we get down the way, but we do need to talk about the other major villain in this movie, and who was basically supposed to be the main villain of this film until they realized we have no action sequences really for the first 2 acts, is Green Goblin, played by the lost child. I forget his name completely. The guy from Valerian and 1,000 Planets. Dane DeHaan.
Dane DeHaan.
As I
Dane
said, I'm
DeHaan.
like Dane DeHaan. I just saw the name in my head. Fantastic and a cure for wellness. If you haven't seen that, listen. Dane DeHaan is going for something entirely freaking different than James Franco was going for, and I think. And I know there's going to be another disagreement on this. I think for this version of Harry, it works. For a character who is like completely a removed friend, the relationship between Peter and Harry in this is so drastically different from what the comics have, from what the previous Spider-Man films had, in the sense that he is the friend that moved away and you don't see for 10 years, and then he just pops up out of the blue and he's like, hey, how's it going? That kind of deal. And like, oh yeah, my dad's dead. I just inherited a fucking multi-billion-dollar company, and also I'm dying from a rare disease, so I'm a little desperate right now. It's like, you know, it's like you haven't seen this guy in like 10 years and he comes back and he's got like a heroin addiction, and you're like, well, fuck. And you're like, you used to be really good friends, and you're like, I don't know how to deal with this.
Okay, well, there's a lot to break down in what you just brought up. Because one, when they cast Dane DeHaan, obviously Chronicle's a great movie.
Yep.
We'll talk about Trank's Fantastic Four someday. That'll be just a tease for another episode. But Chronicle's a great movie. Dane DeHaan is great in that movie.
Yes.
So there's no debating that. When they cast Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn, I was completely on board. And 10 years later, I still think that's a great choice. Now, I think a lot of his motivations are very, very weak. And I don't mean as in like, yeah, if you were dying of a rare illness, yes, you'd be desperate. But when you watch the movie, you're like, wait, why is he dying of a rare illness? Because the inherent thing to me that makes this whole plot not work is, one, I'll start off complimentary. The fact that they just kill off Norman immediately, I am okay with.
Yeah.
Because any filmmaker and storyteller, you know, worth their merit would look at Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin and Norman Osborn and just go, well, you ain't topping that. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they realize that in later films too.
And the Green Goblin ain't the Joker, where it's the same individual. Mm-hmm. You know, the Joker's not a legacy character. Green Goblin has been a legacy character and has been a very good legacy character. So yeah, obviously you're not topping Willem Dafoe's Norman Osborn. So I totally get them just killing off Norman and going straight to Harry. Yep. I was completely fine with that. Mm-hmm. That is actually a really good choice. Now, the thing that I didn't get, even at the time, or actually even now I don't get after 10 years of this movie being out, is he has this rare illness and he's desperate to cure it and he's dying, but Norman Osborn is like 70 and still alive. And he's like just barely like starting to waste away from it. So there's that line where like Harry Osborn is like, I'm already dying. your blood can't make me die more, or something like that. I'm like,
Right.
dude, you have like 50 good years ahead of you, and you're a billionaire.
Okay,
Like,
okay. Let me get
You know
the
what I
pad.
mean?
I'm coming, Sony.
Okay.
I think in this aspect, I think it's because I can't explain this fictional disease that they totally made up because they're just like, fuck it, we gotta get rid of Norman Osborn.
This McGregor syndrome that they've diagnosed him with.
That gives you goblin hands, basically. I think the idea, and I mean, this is like this is a script writing issue for sure. That you will see a lot in like a Roberto Orsi production usually, and a Kurtzman production usually as well. Is that okay, this disease, as far as I could tell, is like something where it's like, it's not a case of like, oh, it's slow and you go through it for decades. It's like, it's just going to spring up and you're basically on life support within like a few months, essentially, I think is what they're going for. Because Osborn is like, within the aspect of like Amazing Spider-Man 1, he is just now, as from what I could tell, what is sprinkled in there, he is just now starting to go through the disease aspect in the first Amazing Spider-Man. And that's why they're like pushing Kirk Connors to really like ramp up his lizard formula and what he's working on, because his disease has just started to get worse, basically. So I think it's something where it's like, as it pops in, it's going to get worse within a year or two and you're dead, basically. So I think that's what they were kind of going for here. And I think that's what fuels like the drive for Harry. But at the same time, you know, there's this other aspect too, where it's like, his character is going through the whole thing of like, you know, having the company basically stolen right out from under him by the other executives in charge, which I think feels like the desire to get this done now, basically, because like if he waits, he might not even have the ability to do it anymore to begin with, because he needs whatever Oscorp's got to do it. So I think that's what they were going for. It's just a matter of like, there's too many different things that are going on that you yourself as the audience have to connect, because they just, for whatever reason, are not just like, I have to do this now because I only got like a year left because it's starting to show, and also I'm going to be kicked out of my company soon, so I got to do it now. They're there, those elements are there, but they don't connect for the audience to be like, oh, okay, that's why this shit's happening. That's why he's so desperate. That's why he screams, "You're a fraud, Spider-Man!" And just this little bitch fit and falls on the couch.
one of the great line deliveries of cinema is, "You're a fraud, Spider-Man." Yeah. Like, you know, but okay, that scene is something I also wanted to bring up, because Spider-Man shows up basically to tell him, "I'm not going to help you," which is like, had it coming, dude. But then his reasoning is like, "Oh, if you have my blood, it could really hurt you," or something like that. One, he's not just going to stick it straight into his arm. Like, he's going to synthesize it and study it. And two, the one thing that they never even bring up that, I mean, I guess Peter could have been thinking, but they never even address it, is like, why would he give his blood to a lab that could do DNA testing and very easily find out who he is?
Okay. Sony's strongest soldier, up to that again. Okay. This is another similar fucking issue that happens in the movie, where this little pieces are there, but they never fucking bother to connect this shit themselves, so I gotta do all the damn legwork for this movie. I think the idea, okay, in this sequence where he's just like, "Oh, I can't give you my blood because we don't know what it'll do," I think that is a very scientific method to take with it, because he's just like, "I can't give you my blood because we have no idea what it's actually going to do. You think it could be the lead to a cure, but we don't know if it can make you worse." And it turns out that, like, hey, Oscorp already has Parker's DNA anyway because of his father in the basement of the goddamn building, because remember, when he turns, he's like, "Oh, you had it with you this entire damn time," which, you know, spells interesting things too for like what happened with Norman Osborn and like company usurp and all that. So he's like, "Oh, you had it the whole time," and he injects himself, sight unseen, basically injects himself, and it makes him worse. So Peter was correct in his assumption that we don't know what it could do. It could make things worse, and it did. It turned him into his little trash goblin form. So again, the pieces are there, but there's so much other shit going on that they don't take the time to connect all of that together for us, because, hey, you got to know that, like, Peter's parents are spies, and also the rare blood, and also it's like the spiders have Peter's blood, and it's just, it's bizarre.
If only this was... if only this was explained in the movie
Right.
instead of on a podcast 10 years later.
10 years later,
Somebody's just watched this movie multiple times.
with this guy who
and done
watched it,
extensive research of the behind-the-scenes development of it.
You've got this guy who watched the movie at least 10 times and has watched the 2.5-hour behind-the-scenes documentary at least 5 times, and I'm like, I know the ins and outs of this fucking movie, and I gotta explain this shit because the movie doesn't do the damn work itself, and it's unbelievable that they don't, because it would. It's so funny talking about all of this and being like, remember we were talking about the plot of Spider-Man 3 and it was like, man, there sure is a lot going on, and it's just like, I don't have enough air in my system to talk about all the plot lines that are going on in this movie.
There's not enough Pepsi Nitro in the world for you to be able to accurately cover all the shit.
I got less than 50% of this drink left. I'm running on fumes at this point, man.
Yeah, exactly. This I'm surprised that Pepsi Nitro doesn't have a Kraven the Hunter tie-in on it.
Right.
But it's one of those things where, like, again, we're not even addressing one of the dumbest scenes in this movie where he goes down into a subway and there's a secret subway car that is only activated by coins found in his dad's calculator. And it's just like,
God.
What? And again, talk about overcomplicating things. It's like, remember when Spider-Man just stopped bank robbers?
Right.
Like, and then like the things that you were interested in was like the emotional arc that came from trying to balance that. Come on, man. Like, I'm not talking to you. Like, I very much respect your opinion.
No, I know.
I'm talking to the people who made this movie as a whole.
In my
like,
head,
what were they?
In my head, what's playing right now is like that scene where it's like, and I will do it for you. And it's me just looking at Amazing Spider-Man 2 right now. And I will do
We
it
have to put
for
together
you.
the whole Zodiac killer, like, threads going around the room. I will say this. When I was watching it in the theater, because Mark Webb, good filmmaker, I think I think he drew the short stick as far as directing superhero movies go, based on which projects he decided to do. Again, if good filmmaker, no disrespect to the guy, but like he is like the worst friggin' filmmaker when it comes to needle drops, because you're just like that freaking Coldplay song in the first one, and then now this in Spider-Man 2. But like, I remember sitting in the theater opening weekend, the day after Free Comic Book Day, sitting there with my buddy Corey, who, again, another tease, he'll be on the show, very soon. But I was sitting next to him, and when that song came on, I just turned to him. I literally said, I'm like, what in the hell are we watching?
See, this is the juxtaposition, because like I was in the movie theater. I'm like, this is cinema, right?
And you know what? I have to add, at the very end, I was thinking about it when I was writing the outline to this. 10 years later, as a now person in their mid-20s who's been through a few relationships, I get it.
Yes.
Like, it's
We have all been there.
It's melodramatic as hell, but anytime somebody's going through a breakup or any kind of relationship trouble, that is how melodramatic you get.
Yes, absolutely.
Didn't on the topic of music briefly, didn't Mark Webb tap Pharrell? Kind of call back to the beginning of the episode. Didn't he tap Pharrell to be on this project, right? To the music for us, to contribute some music to this?
I don't know if Mark Webb specifically tapped Pharrell Williams, but I do know like Hans Zimmer was like on like another wavelength essentially, because he was just like, I'm gonna get like 10 drummers from different bands on this movie, and they're all gonna perform at the same time while I'm getting my score going, and we're gonna have Pharrell in here because he's the hot shit at the time, because Happy is dominating the airwaves, and Pharrell Williams, I enjoy him. I think he's an interesting guy. I like a lot of his music. And I'm going to say it right now. This score is a fucking banger. This score kills it. Okay, listen. Anybody who has a problem with this movie, I completely get it. But anybody that has a problem with the score, I don't agree with at all. I think you're crazy. The fact that like they went to the extra level of making the score important to what the character is thinking in the moment as well. Like, I'm sorry, I dig Pharrell Williams whispering paranoia, paranoia in your fucking ear for every Electro scene, because I'm like, you're getting the character motivation in the song. These fucking guys are cooking on another level here. This is Phil Collins again. He's back.
Yeah,
Wow, okay.
I would love it. I would love it if in Dune, Hans Zimmer just, instead of having like those like choral singers, just had the singers playing like, he's gonna be a bad guy.
Right.
He's not a good person. He's gonna take over the universe. Like,
Listen.
literally.
that fucking New York Times, the Times Square sequence is so fucking great because, well, visually it's very pretty, and also that score is fucking hitting every damn beat of the action sequences. As soon as like Electro's like charging up with that wire in his chest, and you hear him do like his little yell basically, and you just everything goes quiet. It's like whoa, whoa, whoa. Bow! It's fucking great. Everything explodes. You got shit falling everywhere. That is I saw that sequence again recently, rewatching for this, and I'm like, man, I miss when Spider-Man had cool shit like this in it.
No, I completely agree. There's good stuff in this movie. Top of the top being the Times Square scene.
Yes.
That is awesome. And with Spider-Man like trying to talk him down and being like, no, I'm trying to help you. Let me help you. Like, that's Spider-Man right there. That is some good Spider-Man shit. And the way that he saves everybody from being electrocuted on all the metal railings and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Great, good shit. Like, there's also like, this is like a minor detail, but I love the part where shit is falling down, like electricity is blowing out through everything, people are running, there's chaos, and you just hear the one cop going like, does anybody have visual on Spider-Man? I love the idea that the on-the-ground first responders of New York view him as one of them.
Right.
I love that like little detail of like, if Spider-Man shows up, it's going to be just like another branch of first responders. You got cops, paramedics, firefighters, and Spider-Man.
Yes.
Those are the people that help out New York, and they all work together.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I think that was I found that to be actually really interesting because I do think that's kind of a natural arc from the first one where they're all hunting Spider-Man basically, and then by the end it's like they kind of realize like, oh, he is trying to help us, and that leads into this one where it's like, yeah, like you say, he's part of the first responders team, and I think that's really interesting. I think that's a great way of handling Spider-Man without doing the whole like, oh, the cops are after me, or I gotta always get out of here when the police arrive. It's like, no, there's part of that fight sequence where he's just hanging out with the firefighters after they take down Electro. That's great.
Yeah. I just thought of this right now. Isn't it weird that out of all the Spider-Man movies that have been made, there's only one where Spider-Man has a climactic final battle, like in front of like a cheering crowd or in front of civilians?
Yeah.
And it's Spider-Man 3. Yep. Isn't that every single other climactic battle is some isolated place? Because I was just thinking about that where you're talking about like, oh, they see that he's trying to help them and stuff. I'm like, yeah, and if he had fought the lizard like in front of everybody, it would have worked even better. But also, again, this tone is completely inconsistent with the first film, so it doesn't. Yes. In some ways, it feels like a sequel to the first one, but at the same time, you're like, wait, this is the same franchise, so that's a problem as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna have to keep us moving because like I can keep going about this fucking movie for hours on end, and I realized that like, hey, we gotta cover a couple more topics here before we move on. Peter and Gwen's romantic relationship in this movie, I fucking dig because man, we have all been there.
Oh, these listeners don't even have any idea.
Listen, when you were like, if you were like 15 when this movie came out and you hadn't had a girlfriend yet, you can't get it on that level. I'm almost 30, man. Like, I feel this stuff now. I'm like, oh my God, I went through this kind of stuff. I went through that cheesy fucking, breakup or whatever. Or like, you kind of hyper focus on everything. And you like, if you're the one who had your heart broken, you're just like, oh, do I have to lose you too? Like that shit hits me now as an older man. That hits me now. I feel that kind of stuff. And if I were a kid, probably not at all. I'd be like, where's Spider-Man? I want to see him fight someone. But for me, I'm like, that hit me pretty good, and I think it works overall in this movie where it's like that will they won't they thing, and then Gwen Stacy's basically going to leave to go to a different country, which I think is just stupid, but they're basically just doing it to kind of speed up everything, ramp up the tension, and like, oh, maybe they're not going to get together, and it leads to like probably my favorite, this is going to sound hilarious, my favorite romantic scene in the entire Spider-Man oeuvre of films, where he picks her up, and they're standing on top of the fucking bridge, and he's just like, oh, I'm going to go with you to England, that kind of thing, and the fucking score is hitting right, and they're just having their little cutesy moment together, and like, I'm just like, I am fucking loving this shit. This is like the romantic shit I love about Spider-Man, and it is all it's all fucking there in that moment. I love it so much. And that's what really sells the tragedy at the end of the film, for me at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think while we're on the topic of what the film, I think I would argue the few things, but nonetheless, the things that the film actually does right and that it set out to do, like some of its goals, I think we can all agree that easily the best part of this film, on a similar note to Spider-Man 3, is the relationship between Peter and now Gwen Stacy in this, and how strong that is. Just building off of The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and leading into all the complications that their relationship goes through in this film, I think it's very easily the best part of it. And I mean, you just got to give it up, regardless how you feel the film. I think you got to give it up to Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield for the chemistry in this, because they sell the hell out of this relationship. You know what I mean? Now, remind me, and correct me if I'm wrong, they were actually dating at a time, I think, during this production.
They were during the production of both movies. Yes, they were dating, and that's very evident in their performances.
Oh yeah, because it's amazing, and and like Marty was saying, it's very relatable. I guess it helps being that they were in an actual relationship, but nonetheless, it's very relatable. It's very endearing, and very humanizing. Like just how well they're able to portray it, even with all the ups and downs that go throughout of it. This whole film. So I think in that regard, you got to give it up to this film in that it does at least achieve, if nothing else, is able to sell the Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker relationship very well, even with that ending, the particular ending. So I think in that regard, it's a dub for the film. As far as anything else, I don't know where it succeeds, but at least on that front, it has that going for it.
I agree. Everything good that people everything that people remember fondly from this duology is the Peter Gwen stuff. Like that is the heart of it. And I think a common criticism that as a kid, I was totally down with, but as an adult, I disagree with, is that this is too much like a YA type of Spider-Man, which is, first off, is stupid because it's not. Like, this, people are like, oh, it's like Twilight, but with Spider-Man. No, just because Andrew Garfield has great Robert Pattinson hair doesn't mean that this is the Twilight version of Spider-Man. But what I will say is, if people want to use the idea of it being YA to criticize it, do you not know who Spider-Man is? Right. Like the character is an ongoing soap opera of lots of emotional problems. They just happen to be set against the backdrop of a superhero world. Yeah. So, I mean, Ultimate Spider-Man by Bendis and Bagley, which, in my opinion, is the best Spider-Man that's ever existed in comics. That is completely YA as far as the problems they have to deal with. Now, it deals with these YA problems and storylines maturely, and that can be an argument you can make over whether these movies deal with them maturely or not. I happen to think that they mostly agree with them, or mostly explore them in a mature manner. It does not feel like Twilight to me.
Right. No, I think that was, I remember that back in the day, and that's an absolutely ridiculous complaint. At the end of the day, yes, Spider-Man is a soap opera. Spider-Man is about the complicated relationships that come into your life and, the constant trials we all face. And I feel like that's something that people, as you get older, you start to appreciate those aspects of the character even more so. And, it's something I appreciated in Sam Raimi's movies. It's something I appreciated in these movies. It's something I fondly miss in Spider-Man after we got to the home trilogy. I miss this kind of stuff where it is like, yeah, this is everyday stuff that we all go through, but it's important that Spider-Man goes through it so we understand, like, oh, this is normal, this is human to go through these kind of emotions and these trials and tribulations. That's normal. Spider-Man is a character that rationalizes that kind of stuff for you. And I love that that's an aspect of this film, and just for the character in general. I love that you bring up Ultimate Spider-Man because, like, clearly Sam Raimi was inspired by the 60s and 70s Spider-Man stuff. This film, and I would argue the first film, are so heavily, clearly inspired by the 90s and Ultimate Spider-Man stuff. And for better or for worse, it is, as the Clone War, the Clone Saga, and all that shit is just like, yeah, there's a lot of bad that came from that period, but there's a lot of fucking fantastic material. And I agree, I love the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. I adore that stuff, and I see so much of that DNA in these movies. Now, to carry it along a little bit, I do think we need to mention overall, when Gwen Stacy dies, do you feel something when that character goes? Now, I'm not talking about the stupid webbed hand reaching out for her or anything like that. I'm not talking about that, but I am talking about like when you have the love interest die, do you feel something? Because I mean, like, usually if a love interest dies in these movies, it's just like it's the fridging thing where it's like, you know, just kill them off for shock value, and then we can get the actual plot going. This is the conclusion of their romantic relationship, and it doesn't happen until the last 20 minutes of the movie, basically. For me personally, I think it works really well. Andrew Garfield sells the hell out of the moment where her head fucking smacks on the goddamn concrete, and he sells that moment so well, I thought, you know. And it's a different thing, because most of these movies don't do that. They don't kill the main love interest, and if they do, it's like that's the main goal of the movie. Like, that's the first 20 minutes. Deadpool 2 did it, where it's just like, I just kill him off so we can get like motivation going. So
yeah,
what do you think?
Well, Nick, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I would say that it's really tough to analyze that moment, just because the hand thing is just so fucking egregious. It's just so silly. But if I'm able to compartmentalize that and put it aside for like 2 seconds, yeah, I would say, just because, again, given to the testament of how strong the performance and honestly the writing was for Gwen and Peter throughout both of these movies, but especially in this one, I think that all of that emotional buildup leading to Gwen's death, and again, handing aside, that when she does smack the ground, it's like, whoa, shit, like it's kind of visceral. And like you said, Andrew Garfield just absolutely kills it with his performance, selling the hell out of this tragedy. And I do remember, I don't remember much of this film, and what I do remember is mostly negative, but I will say, in that moment, when I was able for a split second to set aside this kind of like silliness of the web part of it, I did feel like, oh shit, like I do feel like an emotional connection. I have an emotional response to her death. It impacted me, because it's like these people had such a great relationship that we were watching throughout these two movies. So in that regard, I think the film, despite it all, I think the film was able to actually achieve the goal of having you emotionally resonate in that moment for these two. And it's tragic. It's beautiful and it's tragic. And at least for me, in that moment, I was able to feel for what Peter was going through.
I think that this is the one emotional moment of this movie that really hits home. Yeah. I think it's the one that they really nail. I don't particularly like the sequence of events leading up to it. I don't particularly like the way that it is executed, but I think the point of it, I'm sorry, Martin. I will say this, I will compliment the sequence of events leading up to it in this respect, of when the goblin grabs Gwen Stacy and he's like hovering above that tower, and Spider-Man can't get to him even with his webs, and Spider-Man just starts begging with him. He's like, please put her down. He's like, this is between me and you, don't try, don't do this to her, like, just put her down, come after me. Like, that's some good desperate Spider-Man pleading. Yes. You know what I mean? Which is those are always emotional moments in Spider-Man comics where he's not able to solve the problem. He just has to sort of plead with the circumstance or the villain to be like, look, at least come after me. Yeah. Not, it's very much the Christopher Reeve Superman, like, don't throw that bus because of the people inside. Like, right. Kick the shit out of me all you want, but just don't hurt these people. That's very good superhero stuff. I think the emotional moment of him discovering it, of that she's gone, is really, really well done. When I first saw it, I genuinely didn't think they would do it. I thought they would tease it and then maybe do it in like the third one,
right?
But overall, I think it's unfortunate that more time is not given to it. I mean, This honestly, like, this should have been like the start of the third act, as far as I'm concerned.
No, yeah, for sure. I'm trying to like speed us along, because I know we have so much still to just bring up real quickly about the post-mortem on this, but I'm sorry. I gotta go to bat for this fucking movie. I'm sorry. This is my Citizen Kane. No, I'm kidding. But okay. I'm gonna name some points right now. Trash Goblin, I love in this fucking movie. I love the design of it. I much prefer it to the Harry Osborn and Spider-Man 3 design. I'm gonna go for that. I hate the Green Goblin in that design compared to this. I love Proto Goblin look in this. I love that he looks like a meth head. I love that stuff. He looks like someone you would see driving down like Sunset Boulevard. It's great. I love that design. I love the music. I love his little soundtrack they got going for him, where it's just like that violin going fucking crazy, basically. I love that stuff. Their fight sequence in the lead up to like dropping her, I adore it because
that is awesome.
it's so frantic.
That is awesome.
It's fast. The panic is setting in. It's like a minute and a half tops, but it's just like it's hitting so hard because the music's going crazy. You feel every punch because there's the desperation in it. It's the ramping up. The time on the fucking clock outside keeps going up. The cogs are all spinning everywhere. You feel the tension.
Peter Parker is literally trying to stop time.
Yes.
You see like the little minute hand wavering.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The fact, I don't mean to interrupt, but the fact that like he's grabbing onto his face and like pushing him away the way you would see like two people in a street fight doing.
Yes.
Like it's not like a big superhero thing. It's like he's literally just grabbing him by the throat and trying to push his face away from him. That's some good desperate fighting.
It is desperation down and dirty fighting, and I loved it so much. I thought it was so fucking great. It's such a great moment. The freaking fiddle's going damn crazy. I love it, and I love that you bring up Peter's trying to stop time, because I'm going to bring this up just for 5 seconds. Time is the overarching theme of this damn movie, because you open on a damn watch, the cogs in the watch that are supposed to be symbolically representative of the clock tower at the end of the movie. I swear to God, I know I sound insane, but I'm telling you, there is a layer here that no one appreciates.
You know, someday when all three of us make a really flawed masterpiece that has like a cult following, all of the people that don't get it are going to come back to this podcast and like play this part and be like, oh yeah, like, you know what I mean?
It all makes sense.
It's going to be that. I agree. I just wish it wasn't buried under a lot of like Sony mandated world building, which is the problem. And getting back to Ultimate Spider-Man and being a soap opera, I 100% agree. First off, nothing's ever going to rival the Raimi movies. We talked about this off air last time. Like it's like Donner Superman or like, the Batman the Animated Series. You're just never going to top that interpretation of the character. But as a follow-up, as a successor to the Raimi series, if this had been a smaller scale Spider-Man storyline, intended to be 4 or 5 or 6 movies long, that was a soap opera that followed the Ultimate Spider-Man kind of model of, bringing in reinterpreted versions of all of these characters for a more modern audience. Absolutely, this could have worked. The problem is it's tried to be retrofitted into the Avengers / Iron Man. You know what I mean?
And that's something we're going to have to bring up, is like the unfortunate downfall for this movie big time is that, like, for me, it's like as a post-mortem thing, it's like I can shrug it off and be like, okay, he beats Rhino at the end, and then that ruins Harry's plans, and that's the end of it, and there's no Sinister Six or anything like that. I can fucking make up that canon in my head to make it work, basically. But a big issue with this movie is that they are clearly trying to set up like Sinister Six, the other Amazing Spider-Man sequels, and they were trying to set up another Venom movie. Famously, if you ever go back to the trailers for this movie, you will see the black symbiote goo in the like laboratory sequence where they're showing like, the vulture wings, the Dr. Octopus tentacles, because they're trying to get that world building done in fast. It's like when you play all the fucking teaser clips of the Justice League characters in Batman v Superman. It's just like that sequence. But then it's like, you have like in one of the trailers, you see the symbiote goo sloshing around, and they CGI'd over that shit with the Rhino suit in the movie, because they're just like, oh, well, we'll just save that for the actual Venom spinoff that we do. And it's just like all this.
When it was going to be called Venom Carnage.
Yes. Oh God, yeah, that's right. And then you have Felicia Hardy in this movie as like Harry's assistant, and she's supposed to be set up for the Black Cat in her own spin-off with Silver Sable, which was going to happen at some point. It's been in development hell, and it might be a limited series in 10 years, who knows. But you have all this like universe stuff they're trying to do, and the movie goes bunk, and not a lot of people liked it. And it's just like, you see like the fallout that happens. And here's the thing, they probably would have done Amazing Spider-Man 3 and Sinister Six had they not pissed off the North Korean government.
Well, okay, before we get into that, I would just like to make one last point.
Let's do it.
Because I've been sitting on this the whole time. This is definitely a hot take, and I would like to point out that this suit is much better than the Amazing Spider-Man 1 suit.
Absolutely.
But I think it was a huge mistake even switching the suit, because again, it feels so disconnected from the first movie. They never show him getting a new suit, which, I mean, I don't need an explanation. I get that he made it. I can roll with that. But just as far as like, it just doesn't even feel like the first movie. Like, it's not shot like the first movie. It doesn't
Right.
have the same tone. The suit isn't the same. Like, this movie, even though it like directly follows like thematically the first one, it feels like a soft reboot.
It does.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you imagine if the second Robert Pattinson Batman movie had him just randomly like in Ben Affleck's suit?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and like the tone is totally different. Like, it would be like that.
Hey, Freeze, I'm Batman.
Yeah, I think it's just a huge mistake, like switching up the aesthetic that they established in the first one, because the first one is a successful one that they're trying to follow. Don't try and soft reboot it, tweak it a little bit, but like, it just doesn't even feel like the same universe to me.
I'll just rip off the Band-Aid and say it's my favorite Spider-Man suit in any of the movies. So I'm just gonna rip off.
Oh God,
I'm gonna rip off that Band-Aid now. Like, I love it more than Toby's suits, and I love Toby's suits, but this is just an inch higher for me. And oh boy, are we gonna get to like the hot takes right now? Because I mean, like, I'm full of them with this movie. So I guess I should rip off all the Band-Aids right now. This is my second favorite Spider-Man movie.
goddamn.
It's like Spider-Man 2, Amazing Spider-Man 2. Oh my god, I sound insane, but it's true. I mean, okay, that comes with the caveat that, like, Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3 are much better movies than this. Absolutely 100%. This tickles my funny bone just a little too much for me to ignore it. So, it's a flawed movie, tremendously so compared to the first three. The first three are absolutely better made movies, 100%. I just like this a little bit more than 2 out of the 3. So, and I'm sorry, Sam. I love you. I love your movies, but I have to be true to myself.
Well, I mean, as we kind of approach the end here,
Yes.
I think just kind of how Marty alluded to it, I don't think we can talk about this film, especially given its own legacy, without at least briefly touching on the 2014 Sony Pictures hack.
Yes.
And the fallout of that. So, kind of similar note to what we talked about last time with the end of Spider-Man 3 in the Raimiverse. Fill me in, boys. So we're in 2014. This hack happens because of the comedy by Seth Rogen and James Franco, lampooning the North Korean government. What is that really what stopped this from going on? Was it the critical reception? Was it the box office? What stops this being a duology instead of being a proper trilogy or saga?
You are asking the right two guys, because both of us were deep in the trenches of the comment section of comicbookmovie.com for the entirety of 2014, and we saw the discourse go down. We were there in the trenches. We saw the mustard gas being thrown. We saw all the war crimes that would later be outlawed by the comic book United Nations that was going on in those trenches. We were there when that dude wrote that article about how Shailene Woodley could be made more attractive to be perfect for Mary Jane. Do you remember that, Martin?
Oh yeah,
this was the Wild West of comic book discourse before like people would be made fun of by the actual people in the movie on Twitter.
Right.
This was before any of that, where you could just say whatever you wanted and people would just roll with it.
Yep.
So this was a wild time. So from May and keep in mind, this is before a lot of comic book canon was established. There was no DCEU at this time. X-Men and Fantastic Four. Trank's Fantastic Four hadn't even come out yet. We were still living in the world where an X-Men Fantastic Four crossover made by Fox was a possibility. You know what I mean? We were like, our minds were blown at the idea of Daredevil being made into a more mature show on Netflix. It was such an innocent time. So from May to December, we were going through just rumor after whiplash. If you weren't hearing something about Ben Affleck's Batman, you were hearing something about Venom. And it's so you get to December, and so we've gone through like half a year of people being like, well, this sucks. Like, what are they going to do with this? You hear rumors of Norman Osborn's going to be brought back as a head in a jar. You hear that Amazing Spider-Man 3 she's going to be brought back as a clone. And not the cool way that Bendis did where she's actually Carnage, but like there's going to start cloning people. All this weird shit that's getting even further away from what people wanted from Spider-Man. Then, boom, you hear what Amy Pascal was planning for this franchise, and people are just like appalled. absolutely appalled. And I have screenshots here, but let's let Martin fill us in too, since he was equally as in the trenches as I was.
Oh, just like on okay, you gotta understand, and I feel like it's important to note, like, Amy Pascal is a fucking insane person. I'm just going to say that right off the bat, and I'm going to go on to this podcast
unless she wants to hire us someday.
Unless she wants to hire us, I will do whatever you want, Amy. I swear to God, I will. But your plans for this franchise were fucking insane, and I don't know what was going on. Where we were talking about like an Aunt May spin-off movie, where it's like a prequel film, and like you thought that was a joke. When I saw that article, I'm like, this is a joke. Like, this is made up bullshit. No, it was in the emails. They were talking about it. Like, oh no, that's too stupid. We'll revisit this down the line, basically. That kind of shit.
Good God.
And it's just like these insane ramblings that like leaked out from this time period. I mean, this is when she was the CEO, like the head of Sony Pictures Entertainment. And that's like where the Ghostbusters reboot came around a few years later. You know, that was the fall of the house right there. Where it's just like all of these things, like these bad decisions were colliding at this point. But yeah, so it was like, you had the Aunt May spinoff that was totally like being talked about, which is insane to think about. Oh my God. Oh, I'm blanking right now on the specific thing that I was just like, oh my God, this is insane that they would even talk about this. But I do think it is important to know. At this point, the reason that they went into rebooting this franchise wasn't so much that like, oh, Amazing Spider-Man 2 was poorly received and financially probably just barely broke even, if they're probably. Essentially, everybody and their mom was pressuring the company into folding into the MCU. They're like, you have to put Spider-Man in the MCU. There was a lot of fan backlash for it, vocally, all over the place. It was all over, you know, just like the day-to-day life of like, you know, seeing edits of like Andrew Garfield in the Avengers, Age of Ultron, that kind of stupid shit. It was everywhere.
Sony almost struck a deal to have the Oscorp Tower in the skyline of the Avengers film. Or vice versa, the Avengers Tower in the skyline of the Amazing Spider-Man. I don't remember which. But it was, the Oscorp was going to appear alongside the Avengers Tower is the point.
Now, there's a lot of rumors and a lot of speculation about certain things that may have gone on at this point to influence their decision to reboot. Some of it's completely horseshit. There's no way to actually verify it, where they're like, oh no, Andrew Garfield was actually fired because he pissed off like the head of Sony Entertainment, like the Japanese company portion. And it's like, I don't know if I find that believable at all. But it is pretty much understood that like essentially Sony's head company pushed them into rebooting because they saw it as a more financially viable option, and they're correct, because Sony was footing the bill on the next couple of movies and making all the profit essentially off of it. So I get it. But yeah, so it was a Wild West time basically, man.
Well, I have the screenshot here of what they were planning. If you want to talk about Wild West. Here we go. And I'll be brief, I promise. So they were going to meet. All the producers were going to meet, a big powwow, and these were the three options they had planned. Continue with full ownership starting in 2016 with Amazing Spider-Man Sinister 6 Part 1 and Amazing Spider-Man Sinister 6 Part 2 in early 2017. Late 2017, female-led film starring Emma Stone as antagonist Carnage. This leads into 2018 Venom film, which would have starred Channing Tatum as Venom. And finally, The Amazing Spider-Man 4 Part 1 in 2018 and The Amazing Spider-Man 4 Part 2. I don't know why they're calling them Part 1 and 2 when they already have a number at the end, but it's like in 2019. Gives us 5 Andrew Garfield films and 1 more Emma film. Tatum no longer Venom, so reassess options. 2020 female-led spinoff, and then finally in 2021, Spider-Man versus the Amazing Spider-Man with Tobey versus Andrew equals about $2 billion in profits. So they were already thinking Spider-Verse back then. Their second option was to share the rights with Marvel. This benefits Marvel more than us, so not that great. That's an actual note from the email.
Correct.
Spider-Man and Infinity War and Civil War with new solo reboot produced by us, released in 2017 with sequel in 2019. Dylan O'Brien, definite option for new Peter, would start in high school. So this is basically what we got. Then the third option would have been, sell license to Marvel for at least $5 billion. That was also your option. But then here's one. This is one that honestly, looking back on it, I would have preferred. And especially I think it would have been perfect had Amazing Spider-Man 2 been better. Final deal would allow Spider-Man to appear in Civil War with Andrew Garfield as the character. Then in 2017, Amazing Spider-Man 3 would happen. Then they would get more MCU people involved. Marvel can recast everybody but Andrew Garfield. And then Spider-Man would get more MCU appearances with Andrew playing the character. I honestly think that would have worked out better, because then the audience would have had 2 films leading up to his appearance in Civil War, which would have made it even bigger deal. And then you don't have to try rebooting again with the whole thing that they eventually went with.
With the Wonder Bread actors.
I'm telling you now, another hot take, and I have no idea if this would have actually happened or not, but had Amazing Spider-Man 2 not come out and they struck the deal before the sequel, I think they would have just included Andrew Garfield from Amazing Spider-Man 1.
Oh,
in
most
the Avengers.
definitely. Yeah.
There's nothing preventing. And that movie is about as good as most of the average MCU movies of that time.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it fits in right with like Thor and Captain America 1. Like it's about that quality.
No, yeah.
Which is good. Which is good.
Had they probably struck an agreement before Amazing Spider-Man 2, that would have definitely been the case. But, unfortunately, things lined up in a different way. And honestly, I mean, like, I get why they did it. At the end of the day, this benefited them a lot more because, I mean, at the end of the day, they got their 2 highest grossing films as a company from this deal. Far From Home and No Way Home are their biggest films ever. So I get it. They get like, I think it's like 80% of the profits basically from the films, from what they make. So this deal has been incredibly lucrative for them, and they still get to make their Spider-Verse movies and everything, which are, fucking Oscar contender films. And then they get to do their cool little universe cheapy movies where it's like, hey, we got a Venom movie. We got a Venom trilogy. Hey, Morbius costs nothing. Let's make a Morbius movie. Madam Web, sure, whatever. It doesn't matter. As long as we keep making these movies, and we're still making billions off of Spider-Man just by having them make the movies. So I get it. Incredibly lucrative deal. Very smart. Would have been incredibly stupid had they sold the rights to Spider-Man. That would have been insane. So.
Yeah. Because then their biggest franchise would be Ghostbusters.
Yeah, which is that's not enough to carry a studio. So.
Just the insanity that was going on at this time.
Yes.
This is just an example of one email, and then I'll shut up. But it says, hey, Amy, just a couple of rando thoughts from 35,000 feet above LAX. A rising trend we see with millennials are the really extreme forms of experiential exercise. It's power yoga, veganism. Millennials will often post NBD on their social media after doing it, as in no big deal, also known as the humble brag. Wondering if Spidey could get into that some way. He's super athletic, bendy, strong, and it's all no big deal to him, of course. EDM, electronic dance music, is the defining music for millennials. Wondering if there's an EDM angle somewhere with Spidey. His movements are beautiful, would be awesome with a killer DJ behind it. Snapchat just launched a story functionality, which is a sort of day in the life of me told in a series of Snapchats that will expire after 24 hours. And there's a very VIP quality about it since invitation only. Getting invited into Spidey's Snapchat circle would be huge and very buzzworthy and cool. This is what they were thinking, like back in the day.
This is if you're ever curious, like, what is it like with these film studios when they have like these 60-plus-year-old people in charge? This is what's going on. This is how they think what you want movies to be.
If you ever want to see what it's like when the people that are in charge of movies write the movies, watch either the first Annabelle movie from the Conjuring universe, or watch Wish Upon, or any of these fucking like Z-level ghost movies that they put out in January, and just listen to how the teenage characters talk, and you'll see how these people who are 60 plus perceive our generation.
My God.
Yeah. So. What a wild ride this has been, and I can kind of believe we talked more about this than we even did Spider-Man 3. I could still do a whole commentary on that movie. Maybe we should do that in the future, because I can knock that out.
We probably will start doing Heroic Efforts commentaries, but that's further down the line.
Nick, don't worry, you don't have to come for that when I get it.
Yeah.
Jesus, please for me.
Yeah. Well, the thing is me and Martin sitting through these movies and talking for hours about them is sort of a humble brag. It's sort of an NBD, as in no big deal.
Okay.
That we can endure this shit and continue to talk about it.
So Amazing Spider-Man 2. Amazing Spider-Man 2, a mixed received movie that destroyed an entire cinematic universe and basically saved the MCU from falling apart in post-COVID era. What a time it has been. I will say, hey, Spider-Man No Way Home, not a good movie, but I will take the fact that at least it gives some closure to Andrew Garfield's character. I'm fine with that. I will take it and run. At the end of the day, I love this movie. I totally get everyone's complaints. I get why you guys don't drive with it. I completely understand. I'm going to be in my own little weird corner blasting fucking Pharrell Williams and Hans Zimmer till the day I die.
It's a big, ridiculous cartoon, but if I was 10 years old and it was Sunday morning and I didn't have to go to school and all my homework was done and this came on Cartoon Network or something, I would have a blast watching the Spider-Man parts of it. You know, it's definitely something that like a freaking sugar high child like could definitely just like roll with as far as just like the plot inconsistencies and stuff. It's a big, ridiculous cartoon. And on that level, I can see why you appreciate it.
We are all Jorge in this movie. We are that little boy wearing the Spider-Man suit going, I knew you would come. And I think that line might have been dubbed. It didn't sound like him at all.
I'm pretty sure you're thinking of the kid in Batman Begins. Like the better version of this.
Oh, right, yeah. Oh, no, you mean the little kid in Hellboy, right?
Again, the better version of this. Of what they're attempting to do. Like, I do like the idea of Spider-Man going around solving crimes as the radio people talked about him on the radio, but that's beside the point. We've already talked about this for an hour and 20 minutes. It's just another thing I like.
Let's get out of here. Nick, any closing thoughts before we end this?
I will say, just so we don't kickstart another 2-hour discussion on here, you know, this movie was certainly it was certainly a movie. And I think the more interesting thing with it, which I'm excited to get into with the, you know, our next coming episodes, is the placement of this and the transition. You hit on the head at the very end there, Marty, but this film ended essentially another franchise for Sony, but then it started a whole new divergent evolutionary path. And if we're looking at the cape shit, you know, evolutionary timeline or fossil record, this was another big moment. This is another definitive kind of moment in that fossil record where things in this whole emerging subgenre changed, I think, completely. It blew up in an astronomical way, and I'm excited to get into that into our next episode. So until then, thank you so much, everyone, for sitting down with us and listening to another episode of Heroic Efforts. I look forward to our next topic, and thank God it's not going to be another one of these amazing Spider-Man films, but you know, we will see you guys then. Hope you join us, and I'm looking forward to those discussions. And anything else you want to add, guys?
I promise these episodes are going to get shorter a little bit.
God, I would just like to say I think it's ironic that this is produced by No More Talking Productions, because it's the exact opposite of what we do on this show. But you know what? Maybe the irony can be interpreted as artistic.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate you all listening to me ramble. I've been waiting 10 years to get this off of my chest, so it feels good. I'm going to go watch it again right now, probably after I sleep. But anyway, thank you guys for checking out the episode. We hope to see you guys for the next one. Really appreciate y'all taking the time to listen to this hour and 20-minute podcast.
Jesus Christ. All right, everybody. Take care. We'll see you on the next one.
Bye, everybody.
Peace. Heroic Efforts is a No More Talking production, all rights reserved. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please be sure to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. It really helps us out. And be sure to tune in next week for more Heroic Efforts.